Hi, I'm Emmy Powers.
And I'm Jocelyn Chi.
In celebration of Wellness Week, Apache News presents our full-length documentary, Inside Out of Mind, in lieu of a standard show.
Voices of Ability and many other clubs located here at AHS created Wellness Week to destigmatize illness, educate, and promote well-being for all of our Apaches. This documentary explores the various stories and experiences of those who suffer from these illnesses. Specifically, students who suffer from mental illnesses such as depression, anxiety, or any other number of afflictions that affect the student body. We hope you enjoy.
The United States is often thought to be the greatest nation on Earth. Millions have been given the opportunity to live life as they see fit. Through our efforts, we've created culture, technology, and an increasingly diverse and inclusive society. As any nation inevitably does, we've run into our share of issues. However, we as people band together to approach any number of issues, including debates over race, gender, ethnicity, income, and so on. And in our mission to bring equality and a feeling of acceptance to all Americans, we've neglected a group comprised of many of us. It never signed up, it knows no racial, economic, or ethnic bounds. It simply affects us, people. Yet in the way our judicial system and society views these fellow human beings is highly prejudiced. I'm talking about those who aren't necessarily normal, those who live and hide in plain sight, the mentally afflicted, an umbrella term that millions of Americans, including many of us, and maybe even you, fit under.
We have been conditioned to think of physical health. You know, if you break your arm, if you have pneumonia, then people say go to the doctor, get treatment. Those are measurable things. Those are things you can see. But for mental health, I think there's still more of a sense of, snap out of it. If you're depressed or anxious, that those are things that you can control, that it's a matter of will.
1 in 5 American teens suffer from or will suffer from some form of mental illness, and suicide is within the top 5 leading causes of teen death. 1 in 4 American adults suffer from or will suffer from some form of mental illness in their lifetime. So nearly 43 million American adults have been diagnosed with a mental illness, and those are just the ones that have been diagnosed.
Well, I think that there's 3 major categories, for instance, for depression. I'll use that as an example. One is a chemical imbalance, which would be like having cancer or diabetes. It's brain chemistry. You can't control that. That would be one predisposing factor for mental illness. Another thing would be drugs. Drug use can precipitate a mental disorder, and then current circumstances.
Half of all substance abusers are mentally ill. Many of us already know this unfortunate fact. Those affected receive assistance primarily from outsider volunteer groups and federally funded programs created by departments like SAMHSA and the National Institute of Mental Health, which give billions in federal grants, which would then be used on a state level to provide resources for the mentally ill. And these programs have been semi-successful. There's no black and white cause and effect in what causes mental illness. A number of factors come into play what triggers these afflictions, and it may be onset, hereditary, just out of nowhere. Nonetheless, it's still painful for all of us. And through this film, I hope to inspire you, the viewer, to push for change in not just your own community, but the communities around you, including the cities, the schools, homeless shelters, the rehab clinics, and even the jails, where many of these people unfortunately are forced to reside. And then, once we realize that, then we can begin to make a difference. The period in life we all face, known as adolescence, is one filled with insecurities, drastic changes, and a slew of new emotional states that shape us for years to come. And in those moments of pain and misguidance, we often find our answers and comfort through our peers, families, and through ourselves. In our modern age, social media and an access to an instantaneous, unlimited source of information brings in new factors and a new landscape for our generation to lose themselves within. It becomes easy for those with mental illness to disappear in the masses, to become just another statistic, and there are millions who would qualify as anxious, depressed, or even suicidal. A few weeks ago, author, clinician, and educator Dr. Horatio Sanchez gave a lecture to a room of our high school students and parents, during which he explained the way in which the brain processes stimuli, primarily the adolescent brain, and how certain stimuli connects to feelings of unease and disappointment, like the consumption of food for relief, our dependency on technology, and the impact of stress on the mind.
Your kids actually need some stress to motivate them, but too much is debilitating. And that becomes a problem, because if you get to a pace that's too severe, depression happens, emotional imbalance happens.
So there was a certain irony in the audience that night. As Dr. Sanchez continued his lecture, cell phones and tablets would spring up during a lecture on the negative effects of technology in our society. So there's more social media, more interactions and socialization amongst teens occurring restlessly and silently.
How many times are you checking your cell phone? the amount of speed of information produces some degree of stress. We have information at our fingertips, so the world is coming at us. There's nothing we're protected from. We know everything at any second and can see it. And then there are the natural stressors of social interaction, home life, and all that social interaction stressor. How we're doing with our peers, who likes us, who doesn't like us. Those things produce stress.
Here at this American high school, it holds a perfect example of a congregation of adolescents all coping with their own issues. Nearly 3,000 students come here to Arcadia High School on a daily basis to learn and socialize, where social media, academics, and external factors affect the student body, often playing into the development of these depressive disorders for hundreds of students.
I never knew my dad until this past year. It was just kind of hard to grow up with that, and I had a lot of trust issues.
Just not wanting to go to school and just feeling down all the time.
Talk about my feelings. I didn't really talk to my friends at all either, because I feel like people, wouldn't understand what I was going through.
I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety.
And for those in need, Kevin Darr and Sharon Sandoval are two of the many counselors at this school who are willing to offer a helping hand to their students.
Part of depression and anxiety is a loss of motivation, a loss of hope, sleep and regular patterns getting messed up. The student can just intrinsically maybe feel not like they have the energy or the skills to reach out for help.
They're concerned that will somehow negatively impact their college admission status. And that's the farthest from the truth.
But really, we always want students to reach out to an adult they trust, whether it's a parent, a teacher, a counselor.
Everyone is fighting some sort of battle. It may not look like it, but almost everyone is fighting some sort of battle.
Here in Arcadia, California, home to one of the highest scoring high schools in the country, the academic standards are elevated in comparison with the rest of the nation. Within Chinese culture, education is seen as the top priority in a child's life. Here, the population is comprised of mostly Chinese and Asian American students, and a large portion of those students hold immense pressure on their shoulders to maintain a perfect academic record, and any ramifications created through the stress of these expectations is silenced out of fear of standing out. Mental illness is taboo.
Asian American, it's really hard because at first, my parents didn't get it. When I was finally able to come around and recognize that I was depressed, my parents weren't really accepting of it. They were like, it's just a phase, or it's just a teen thing. Maybe it's this Western culture that's influencing you.
What I frequently heard was that parents did not want their children to come forward because of the effect it would have in their record or their reputation, that somehow word would get out and tarnish their futures, that the effects would be irreversible if any action is taken. In reality, the widespread stigma has caused a sense of isolation amongst those who feel this way.
I definitely brought it up with my mom a lot. And she always deflected me to my sister because my sister also has similar problems. I never received any real help because my mom is very much someone who believes you can power through everything.
And this doesn't necessarily apply to just Asian students here at Arcadia. The students of Arcadia High School recently created the Voices of Ability Club, formed to communicate with the students who want to maintain the stress, manage their lives accordingly, and bring awareness to those affected by mental illness.
I started this club because I wanted to provide a community or environment where people with or without disabilities can meet and kind of discuss these things, because I feel like there's not enough information that's going around, not many people are educated, and there's a lot of stereotypes and stigma that's attached to people with this, physical and mental disabilities. And I personally struggled with a mental disability.
So what I and many others recommend, if you're feeling as if you need to contact somebody, go to somebody you trust, like a counselor or one of your teachers, and let them know discreetly. This information will not be released to any of the students, and the counselor can give you information on local therapists, some of which have low to no cost sessions. Your next course of action depends on what works for you.
You should be ready to face a lot of failure in order to get to where you want to be. Find someone so that you feel like you're not alone, so that you have someone to talk to.
From a person who used to have really bad depression to the point where I wouldn't come to school, you can get help.
Talk to each other or talk to adults. Look to somebody for some guidance.
I'm reminded of a student that I saw not so long ago at Arcadia High, and she told me that she spends every day at school pretending to be somebody else. And I think that a lot of students look around them and see everybody putting on this face and thinking that everybody else is fine. What's wrong with me? You're not alone, and that there is help out there.
In this time of new friendships and unfamiliar places, we change and evolve, running, crawling, and limping our way into adulthood. And as we look back, we'll see all our flaws and mistakes. We come to realize that in those moments, we became the people we've grown to be. All the pain and misguidance we've known of adolescence can't be summed up so quickly. Those of us that suffer from depression, feel scared or suicidal, at the end of the day remain human, and no closed-minded Facebook post, text message, or harsh rumor can change any of that. But when we lock ourselves away and convince ourselves that there's something wrong with us because of it, that's when we've truly made a mistake. Help is out there, and it's a simple conversation away. Overcoming cultural and social barriers is a difficult feat to accomplish, and ignorance is a disease we will never completely rid ourselves of. If we come upon days that we feel locked in a sense of hopelessness, remember that there are millions of others, many of which who feel too afraid to speak out, because the deeply entangled connotations of their conditions keep them trapped in. Whether they're black, white, Asian, or Hispanic, if we see something, then speak up. If you know something, then speak up. Because if we choose to remain silent, then the cries for help muffle and subside, leaving the millions to fight and wander alone in the darkness. The future of our youth remains uncertain, as it has for any generation. No matter your age, seeking help will always be on the table as a legitimate option. The children of yesterday have made the world what it is today, with all its merit and faults. Some of those people come from a time where the perception of the mentally ill was worse than it was today. Condemning those with conditions a large portion of these Americans will be or are already affected by. Mental illness within drug users, the homeless, and the financially disadvantaged is an extreme prevalence, and those affected often don't have an outlet or proper medical attention to treat their illnesses. So you might be thinking, there must be some way these people get treated. I mean, where does all this funding go, and to who? So let's narrow it down a bit and talk about those who live specifically within the state of California. Residents of California that fall under the 138% of the poverty line or meet any of the qualifications listed under the guidelines qualify for Medi-Cal, which would provide resources and treatment for the mentally ill. Even so, many homeless individuals qualify, yet continue to remain untreated. Medi-Cal is covered by the Department of Healthcare Services, or the DHCS, whose offices are located upstate in Sacramento. I took a flight up there to conduct an interview with the DHCS director, Jennifer Kent, who oversees the coverage of millions of Californians.
So we want to take care of people that are low income, disabled, or suffer from really significant health conditions. We have 22 contracting plans across the state in every single county. And so depending on what your level of need is, either as an adolescent or as an adult, the county is going to assign you to a provider. That provider is responsible for, diagnosing your condition, writing up a treatment plan. If you need pharmaceutical prescriptions, they write the prescriptions. The county sometimes will deploy a mobile crisis unit as well. So we're trying to prevent people from being put into a law enforcement situation that don't need to be because of their mental health conditions. So that's some of the work that we try to do with the counties, is to what we say divert people. So they may have a mental health condition and someone's first inclination is to say, oh, that person's acting really odd, I'm gonna call the police. And really what it is no, that person's just not okay.
Despite the efforts of the state, many continue to slip through the cracks and remain without coverage. Without treatment, some resort to drugs or crime to cope, almost always leading to incarceration, placing them in an endless cycle of institutionalization and release. They in turn become aliens of our society, stuck in a sand trap of poverty and drug use. The sick are diminished to mere criminals. They too have their lives restrained by mental illness. Even as we were concluding our interview with Ms. Kent, she began sharing her personal experiences with mental illness and how it's affected herself and those around her.
So I never met my maternal grandmother. She committed suicide when my mom was in her 20s. My mom probably should have been in foster care long before. Well, my mom was not in foster care because it didn't exist when she was growing up. But my mom was harmed by my grandmother's multiple suicide attempts before she was ultimately successful. And just the trauma that my mother was put through as a child is really isolating and very difficult. And so I think what I have learned just from watching my own family's experience with mental illness is, if you're someone who's struggling either with your own mental health issue, or if you're coming from a family with a mental health issue, you really, it is incumbent on you to find someone safe to talk to. Getting that help, I think, is so much easier than making it worse by letting it build until it really becomes so bad that it can have its own more serious consequences.
Throughout my own life, I at one time viewed the mentally ill as outliers, as those who were born simply broken and wounded. For some this is true, but life has its way of throwing surprises at all of us. It took me years to realize the magnitude of my reality. On June 12, 2011, my mother passed away at the age of 44. I was 11 at the time. I still keep vivid memories of fear and grief that rippled for the years to come. And life just kept throwing its punches over and over, and the future was something to be afraid of. Everything to me was merely temporary, ready to be ripped away at any given moment. Pieces of the puzzle were missing, and just as things seemed to reach their worst, I found comfort in my family, friends, and anyone who was willing to hear me out. Through them, I was able to find the silver lining in an otherwise hopeless situation. I overcame all the depression and the anxiety, and there was a light somewhere at the end of the tunnel because I knew that I didn't have to travel it alone.
And what can we do? Can we really fix an issue so deeply convoluted and difficult? I mean, where do we even begin? Well, let's start by reaching out to those we see in the streets. Volunteer, write to your representative, help state programs reach their full potential, donate to research groups. This may sound repetitive or obvious now, but the mentally ill is an insurmountable population because it's the man living on the sidewalk, because it's the woman next to you in the grocery store. It's your neighbor or your classmate, your best friend, your brother or sister. You or I that could be suffering from a mental disorder. Whether you're a millionaire or homeless, teen or adult, man or woman, it will never leave us, but we can change the way we approach it, the way we fund it and treat it, and someday we can look back knowing we've changed the world for the better, or where nobody has to be afraid to seek help or can't obtain it. It may seem so far away, but if we all just took the time to lend a hand, it would make a world of difference. As many of us said, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So let's start walking.